I want you to imagine the land of Korea, where the winters are long and cold and bitter, and the snow lies deep upon the mountains. And at the foot of those mountains there are forests, and at the foot of those forests there are fields. And once, long ago, at the edge of one of those fields there was a village, and in that village there lived a man and a woman, and the two of them had loved one another since they were children, boy and girl. And so, as soon as they were old enough, they were married, of course. And they began to build a house, a home together. And as they laid each and every stone, they dreamed, they schemed of the life they would build together, just as carefully and as delicately as they laid each and every piece of their house, their home. But war came, and the man was sent to fight, to protect his house, to protect his home. And when he came back changed. He could no longer sit with her, but would turn away and look out at the fields, out at the forests, out at anything, rather than look at her. And at night, when they lay together, he would flinch away from her. And when she asked him, when she questioned him, when she pressed him, "What have you seen? What have you done? Why have you changed?" He would be up and out of the house and into the forests and up the mountains. And it would be hours before he returned. And sometimes, at night, she wondered if he would return. And sometimes, in the dead of night, she wondered if she wanted him to return. And so she knew that something had to change. She went to the wise man, the medicine man of the village, and said, "Please, is there something, anything that you can make, some lotion, some potion that will bring my husband back?" And he said, "There is one I can make." "Then make it." "But there is one ingredient missing." "Then I will get it." "But it is the whisker of a tiger." "Then I will get it," I said, and she turned and slammed the door shut behind her. But as she did so, she stopped and thought, "What have I said? What have I done? How will I find a tiger, let alone steal its whisker?" But then she thought of her husband, and she nodded her head. And back she went to their house, and she put a blanket around her and tied it to her. And then around her waist she put a bottle of water and a bag of dried food and a knife. And then she turned and walked out of the house and through the fields and into the forests and up the mountains, all the while looking down at the ground, trying to see some sign of a tiger, listening to hear something that sounded like a tiger. Until, at last, she came to a mountain, and at the foot of the mountain there was a cave. And at the entrance to the cave, the snow had been scored by claws. And she wondered, are these the marks of a tiger? She didn't know, but she hid. She hid behind a tree and covered herself in the leaves, and the snow trickled off the branches and down her back. And she hid, crouched, until it went dark, and in the twilight grey, a flicker of amber against white walked past her and into the cave and lay down. It was a tiger. Oh, how am I going to get close enough to steal its whisker? But then she thought of her husband, and she knew that she would do it. There had to be a way. She got to her feet, and she began to walk down the mountains and down through the forests and down into the fields towards her home. And there huddled against the snow was her herd of goats, and they looked up at her pleadingly, hungrily, of course. And she knelt down and she brushed away at the snow and found some fresh grass and picked it and held it up and out towards the goats. And one of the goats came up and started to eat the grass, and he nuzzled against her, and she stroked him gently. And as he ate, he leaned against her, and she reached round and cut its neck. And as the blood dripped out of his throat and onto her dress and down onto the snow, she watched and waited until all the blood had flooded out. And when the goat was dead, she carved him up, tore off a piece of her blanket and placed the pieces inside as a gift, an offering to the tiger. And she picked up the bundle and carried it up through the forest and up into the mountains and towards the cave, and then opened the bundle and took out a piece of meat and lay it down by the cave. And wrapping it up again, she hid back amongst the trees and bushes and snow and waited until the sun set once again, and in amongst the twilight grey, the shadowy shape, amber against white, went past her up to the foot of the cave and stopped and bent and ate, and then walked into the cave, lay down and slept. And she smiled. The next day she left another piece of meat. The next day another. And the next day another and another, until at last she plucked up all of her courage and tore off a piece of blanket and lay it down and placed the meat upon it, and then crouched hiding and waited, heart thudding, for the tiger. And the tiger walked straight past her towards the meat, smelt the human and stopped, looked around and straight into her eyes. And she stared back at him. And then the tiger turned and walked into the cave and lay down once again. And she got to her feet. And then she crouched and crawled into the cave and lay down beside the tiger. And while it slept, she placed a hand upon its flank, and she felt the warmth of his skin seep up into her bones. She was warm for the first time in days. And so she lay there and began gently to stroke the tiger, and the tiger's breath tickled against her cheek. And night after night she lay beside the tiger, and night after night she stroked him over and over, until one night she reached out and took hold of a whisker and pulled. The tiger did not even flinch. She took that whisker and she held it aloft, and she got to her feet and walked out of the cave and down the mountain and through the forests and through the fields towards her home. And there stood the medicine man with his door open, waiting. And he looked and he saw a girl he once knew, once so neat, so pretty, so precise, now with her dresses torn and covered in blood, and gaunt and ravenous, with her hair a mess, but her eyes shining, gleaming like a tiger. She walked towards him and said, "I have it! Make me my potion." "There is no potion," he said. "What? You promised me." "I'm sorry," he said. "There is no potion, but you needed to learn how to treat your husband as you did the tiger in order to obtain his whisker. Treat your husband as delicately, as tenderly as you did the tiger, and then he will return." And she glared at him, stared at him, and then nodded once, turned and walked back to her house, and closed the door behind her. And there she did as the medicine man had told her and the tiger had showed her. She treated her husband with the same delicacy and tenderness as she had shown the tiger, until at last he came